You know, I would like to tell you that I think the world is going to be fine and dandy, that it's all just going to be peachy clean, and that we don't really have to worry about any future wars, or that none of that's going to happen. But it doesn't particularly seem that way when we take a look at what's going on over inside of Syria, and when we start taking a look at kind of how things are slowly starting to unfold over inside of Ukraine. And we're going to touch on all that in a little bit more today. But I mean, the major story that we've got to go over, ladies and gentlemen, is that Israel just bombed the living crap out of the Syrian Ministry of Defense. And I don't even think it's fair to call it the Syrian Ministry of Defense. It's the building that HTS, a group that up until last week was considered a foreign terror organization by the United States, is occupying for the purposes of their Syrian army, if you will, right? That would be HTS. And Israel just took it out. Now, all of this started about 24, maybe 36 hours ago, when fights broke out between the Druze and some local militias down south of Damascus. When that happened, Syrian forces, i.e. Jolani's men, i.e. the terrorists of HTS, i.e. ISIS, decided it'd be a good idea to start pushing down into the south. And they had a major battle that took place yesterday. Israel started bombing the crap out of them, pushing their armor back out of the town. All of a sudden, the Druze people were able to start slowly taking the town back, and then overnight, Syrian forces started to accumulate outside of that freaking key town. Let me get this up on the map so I can show you guys where we're talking about, and we could just start going over exactly what the heck kind of, I don't know how to say this, how it slowly unfolded over the last 24 hours and how we ended up getting to this place of like just massive escalation over inside of Syria today. And it's very possible that I think, I don't know, if Jelani doesn't change his ways, man, because there's also airstrikes that just took place outside of the presidential palace in Damascus where Jelani lives. He would be the de facto president over inside of Syria, for those that are unaware. All of this is taking place in the town of Suwaida, all the way over here in like the, how do you want to say this? Like the southwestern, I don't even think that's fair, like southern, like most area, right, of Syria. Now, Israel had originally warned Jelani and his forces to stay north of Damascus, or don't go any further south from Damascus. And this kind of escalated a couple months ago when HTS forces started to ride south, and they were, make no mistake about it, trying to commit genocide. Because of that, Israel actually dropped 2 bombs outside of the presidential palace overnight. This is months ago. Drops 2 bombs outside the presidential palace. All of a sudden, HTS stops, and nothing happened. Well, today, like I said, they were all rolling up overnight, and then right in the middle of a news broadcast, this happens. And this lady that you see up here on your screen is a Syrian news broadcaster, and she's sitting right outside this building over here in the back. This is the Syrian Ministry of Defense. This is the Syrian Ministry of Defense. Watch. Now, that was the first strike that took place on that building. That was the first strike. Now, immediately following that strike, I started getting reports and seeing it that we had a bomb that had been dropped near the presidential palace in Damascus where Jelani was living. And before I even got confirmation of that strike, I kid you not, before I even got confirmation of that strike, I started to see a lot more pouring out from there. Here, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Israel, number one, ended up admitting they provided an operational update over on X, okay? And if I zoom in and I take a look, they said the IDF struck the entrance of the Syrian regime's military headquarters in the area of Damascus. So they had gone after the entrance. That's definitely what that airstrike looked like. It hits low on the ground, all of that crap. IDF continues to monitor developments in the regime's actions against the Druze civilians in southern Syria in accordance with directives, blah, 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 blah. All right? Now, it went from that very, very quickly into, how do I want to say this, just all out freaking bombing. I mean, just straight up all out bombing. غارة جديدة وائل، غارة ثانية، غارات عنيفة جدا، 4 صواريخ، 4 صواريخ. And so what you're seeing up there on your screen is just a full-blown, full-on airstrike that Israel conducted on the MOD shortly thereafter, almost as if they were giving a warning strike, telling people to get the heck out of Dodge before they did that. I want you to take a look at the amount of vehicles and everything else that was on the ground around the MOD. There's reporters all over the place, right? And so I would think that that was maybe their initial assessment. Is that what they were going to do? Kenny Kressler upgraded his membership to become a true supporter. Heck yeah, man. And then we got Christo coming in, gifting out Speak the Truth membership. And the short round says, good morning from hot and muggy Campbell. Ooh, God, Fort Campbell. Ugh. I think that's where you're alleging you're from. Yeah, man. So this situation quickly got out of control. And like I said, that was the MOD. But the presidential palace also, again, reports the presidential palace also got hit. Now, for those of you that don't know, presidential palace ends up sitting up on a hilltop. It's got multiple different structures that are up there. Israel in the past had dropped 2 bombs outside of it. Now, as I'm giving this report, if for some ungodly reason that all of this starts happening, I want you guys to just blow the chat up. Like if you've seen reports that Jelani got schwacked, by all means, please tell me down in the chat that took place, because I seriously could see that happening today. If Jelani's men, if HTS doesn't turn back, if they do not turn back, BB88 says, I've sent you new footage on X. Okay, I'll go over there and take a look at it in a minute because I've got a lot more as well. But if Jelani's men don't pull back, if they don't stop what they're doing down in the south, there's a very good possibility that Israel ends up schwacking him and that he's going to be in the ground tomorrow. Now, the rumor is that Trump ended up telling Israel yesterday not to be bombing the Syrian forces. Leave Jelani's men alone. Israel ignored it for obvious reasons. HTS is committing genocide down in the south. Mighty Lewis? Yeah, Mighty Lewis. There we go. Coming in and giving out 5 Speak the Truth memberships. Man, I can't read today. It's like my head or my eyeballs. They're not working so well. Maybe I need to turn on the studio light. I don't know, man. So that's what ended up taking place. And I did not yet see a new statement from them coming out. Now, Syrian military has been stacking up outside of Al Suwaida. Now, what's not important is whatever this guy's saying. What is important is for you to take a look at what's right smack dab there in the middle of his chest. And there's a reason I saved this video for you guys. You guys recognize that? Anybody see it? Somebody want to tell me in the chat what they see on the middle of this guy's chest that's fighting for Jelani, that's down in the south, pushing towards Suwaida, going down there to kill more Druze? Anybody see that on his chest? That would be an ISIS flag. I know you guys see that, right? Right here in the middle. That black flag right there, that's the ISIS frickin' flag. And the guy's flying it openly on his chest. Now, I had the unfortunate opportunity to talk to a member of HTS last week. What he tried to tell me, Daesh, nailed it. What he tried to tell me was, no, you don't understand. It's the Shahada. It's just this Islamic thing and blah, 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 blah. Nope, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There is beyond a shadow of a doubt exactly what that means. Patrick Loudon says, Turkey requests Jelani leave the presidential palace. Jelani declined. No kidding. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. You're welcome. I just said ISIS. Yeah, no kidding, right? That's who he is. Like that, make no mistake about it, that's who these fighters are. Now, it's kind of contradictory to what Jelani's previous beliefs had been, with him talking about and saying that, when he was, running the al-Nusra Front, which then turned into HTS, and he got told by al-Baghdadi to roll himself up underneath ISIS, he said no. He said he wasn't going to do it, and he continued on his fight. He developed HTS, he pulled in a couple of other terror organizations, and then eventually ended up overthrowing the Syrian government. Now, that's pretty wild within itself. But to see ISIS flags being flown on these guys kind of makes you wonder. Because the only thing that Jelani really demanded of his men, right, like really the only stipulation I really saw coming out of Jelani was that they be Syrians themselves. Like, he didn't want foreign fighters fighting underneath him. He didn't say he didn't want you to idolize ISIS. He didn't say any of that stuff. He just said, no, you can't be fighting for another, or you can't be, from another country. You need to be Syrian. Well, that didn't turn out so good. And today we are seeing the results of the genocidal garbage that his men have been responsible for, in my opinion. And that is ultimately the destruction of the Syrian Ministry of Defense downtown in Damascus. Adara says, did you see the enormous drills going on in Taiwan? Very cool to see. Also, happy birthday, Matt. Ranger panties check. Adara, I'm not wearing Ranger panties today. I'm actually wearing regular pants. Thank you very much. Yeah, those exercises taking place over in Taiwan are actually part of an annual training exercise that they do. People are throwing that around the internet, trying to act like Taiwan is preparing for the invasion, which they are, right? It's not a lie, but at the same time, it is an annual training event that they end up conducting. So The Syrian MOD is gone. Airstrikes are taking place outside of the presidential palace. According to the chat, you guys had just informed me that Turkey requested and or told Jelani to leave the presidential palace as if they knew it was taking place. Now, that's another problem within itself. Because if Turkey was aware that this airstrike was going down, if Israel, the United States, whoever had informed Turkey that that airstrike was going down, and they warned him and told him to get the heck out of Dodge, well, that's just not okay in Matt's opinion at all. Here's another view of that airstrike. Now, obviously, that is a heck of a lot further away, but that gives you a much better idea, I think, in this zoomed out area of how many munitions Israel actually dropped on that sucker. Now, after the first bomb went off over at the entrance, it was being reported that there was casualties that had taken place over there. And I think it's pretty fair to say that if they were in the MOD, they ain't happy anymore. I don't think you're talking about just one or two casualties anymore. You're talking about the numbers being up in the hundreds because HTS was freaking busy riding on freaking Suida. And so the MOD had to have been filled with people, had to have been filled with all their little sympathizers. I think that this is going to be a very significant event. Here's another angle of all these bombings taking place. Let me get that up on your guys' screen so that you can see it. Again, we ended up seeing like these little strikes that were coming in. Right. So first it was the one that ended up hitting on the ground. Then it was this one over here on the rooftop like that you guys see up on your screen. And then it was the entire MOD just ended up getting leveled. I mean, the entire MOD, as you guys saw in that last video, just getting leveled. So it makes me wonder if there wasn't some communications that was going on in between Israel and Jelani because they had an open line of communication. If you guys haven't been checking in lately, the last 2 weeks, Israel has actually conducted cross-border operations over into Syria. And they have taken IRGC operatives and run them back into Israel and dismantled some IRGC networks that were still operating over inside of southern Syria. And Israel had, coordinated? Israel had coordinated with Jelani in order to make that happen. And to me, I looked at it and I said, okay, well, this is probably going to be a litmus test that, Israel is communicating with Jelani. They're conducting cross-border raids. They're going in there, and it wouldn't surprise me if the intermediary between them was Turkey. That would make sense, but I don't know why at that point Israel wouldn't be talking directly with Syria, right? But now you've got a complete and total flip in 180 because Israel is going to protect the Druze. That's beyond a shadow of a doubt. That's going to happen. And if it's so bad that this is the second time the HTS went down there, because before Jelani ended up saying it wasn't his men that were doing that. They tried to blame it on Daesh. They tried to blame it on other fighters. They tried to blame it on everybody else but HTS. And then magically, when those bombs dropped outside the palace, everything ended. Patrick Loud says, Kurds and SDF look like they are ready to go in also. Yeah, you are correct. I saw that. The only problem is they're really, really far away. Really, really far away. So if the Kurds do enter the chat, which they have a little bit of infighting taking place over inside of Iraq, or at least they did last week. I guess I need to check up and see if that's wrapped up. But, I mean, it's incredible if they're going to go down there and join in that fight. Because now Jelani's men are pretty much kaput. Now, here's the other thing. I ended up having a conversation with, God, I'm trying to remember his dang name. Senior news correspondent for Israeli News. I'm trying to remember his dang name. Jonathan Hassan. And one of the things that he was stating was the significance of the Israeli airstrikes yesterday and how grossly underreported they were. Like the amount of ordnance that Israel dropped on HTS troops yesterday outside of Suida. And we're getting more and more footage released of these Israeli airstrikes over the last 24 hours against Jelani's men. And so that airstrike on the MOD didn't come out of nowhere. Yesterday, I showed this to you all, and I told you guys that, Israel was going after their armor, but it also looks like they just weren't going after armor. It looks like these airstrikes that they were going after included very large convoys, a lot of different vehicles, probably some targeted strikes against their leaders, right? And armor. And they pushed that armor back out of the city. And like by Israel bombing the armor, that is what caused HTS to pull out of Suida. But now it looks like HTS overnight has pushed back into Suida, and it's unconfirmed at this point, as far as I know, that HTS has taken back control of that town. But HTS was committing some gross human atrocities over there. Definitely trying to commit genocide. I showed last night that they had burned a church to the ground, that they ended up killing one of the local leaders down there, and all this other garbage. But Israel's not going to stand by and let this happen. They're not. As a matter of fact, the one thing that they were standing by and let happen was allowing the Druze to like cross the border and run in there. Here's another view of that airstrike on the MOD.
شباب في عندنا قصف شباب قصف يا شباب خذونا على الهواء شباب.
Yeah, no kidding, man. It just got bombed, Mr. Al Jazeera. That it did. It just got bombed. So thanks for telling everybody that. Right? And again, that's your initial strike over there down at like the main entrance of that sucker. I've got a bunch of different angles of this because for some reason there was tons of reporters. Now, the spiritual leader of the Druze, his name is Sheikh Tarif. He said the Druze will stay in the lands and fight until their very last bullet. And you better believe that Israel is going to defend them as well.
אתה משוחח עם אנשים שם?
כל דקה. כל דקה אנחנו בקשר איתם, ממש, הטלפון לא מפסיק לצלצל.
מה אתה שומע מהם?
הם בוכים.
וואו.
מה יכול לעשות אזרח עם אקדח או עם קלצ'ניקוב מול טנק? אז הם פשוט מאוד נכנסים לבתים, טובחים, עורפים ראשים, אונסים ומשפילים אנשים, שייכים עם זקן או שפם, מגרחים אותם, פשוט מאוד זוועה. ראינו את הדברים האלה בתקופת הנאצים, שעשו לרבנים דברים כאלה, ראינו את זה ב7 לאוקטובר, ולצערי העולם שותק וחוזר על זה. היה טבח עם העלווים, ועכשיו מנסים עם הדרוזים, אבל הדרוזים יישארו וילחמו עד הכדור האחרון. ואני מקווה שבאמת נציל את המצב. אנחנו בנינו לכל העולם, בנינו לאמריקאים, דיברתי עם השגריר האמריקאי, ואנחנו מקווים שהעניין ייפסק.
Yeah, he spoke to the American ambassador for Syria, maybe. Maybe that's who he's saying that he had talked to, because the American ambassador for Syria is actually calling and saying that he wants a peaceful resolution to this, saying that there needs to be a ceasefire and that whoever is responsible on either side needs to be held accountable for it. But that's not the way it's going. And it looks like the American ambassador's word over inside Syria means diddly squat. Nobody cares what the U.S. ambassador over inside Syria has to say. They don't. This war is raging, and it's going to rage because these men of HTS are pushed by that radical religious ideology, and they don't like the Druze. And there is, how do I want to say this? This, in Matt's opinion, goes further and further to show you that HTS really does push that ISIS narrative. All right, if you don't bite their hard line of being their version of what it means to be a Muslim, they will kill you. We saw earlier this year, as I think he actually just mentioned up on the screen, that the Alawites were getting freaking massacred. The Christians over inside Syria were getting freaking massacred. The Druze obviously were getting massacred. They're all just getting taken out. So, yeah, I think it's time that, this ends up getting ridden up. C88 says, Kurdistan and Syria finally? Maybe. I think that is a good freaking solution for what's been taking place over inside of Iraq and different portions of Iran. Kurdistan needs to happen. It does. In Matt's opinion, Kurdistan needs to happen. Those people have been getting massacred left and right for ages, absolute ages. You got Turkey that declares them a terror organization. You got freaking the fighting that's going on over inside of Iraq. Obviously, you can go back to Saddam Hussein. This is a very good opportunity for the Kurds to actually get their own chunk of land carved out. It might actually happen because all of Syria is, while Jolani is deemed, in control of Syria because he sacked Damascus, you got to understand, there's fighting going on all over that country. And so him being pulled from frickin' power, him being killed by Israel, quite frankly, doesn't really change anything. It really doesn't. The only thing it changes is the international stage because now HTS is going to have their leader. But again, the devil you know might be better than the devil that you don't know. Foster Dad becoming a true supporter. Heck yeah, brother. I love seeing new true supporters signing up on a daily basis, man. That makes me happy. That makes me know that our word is actually getting out there, which is a very good thing. I don't know why there's not more people actually talking and reporting on this at all. Now, IDF has decided to reinforce its forces over near the Syrian border. So they're moving more troops in. If you guys didn't know, IDF ended up establishing a buffer zone that's actually updated over here on Google Maps that you guys can see. You've got the original Golan Heights. I know this is, for those of you that are not familiar with the area, maybe I'll zoom out a little bit. You've got the Golan Heights, all right, that are up over here in northeastern Israel, right, where you've got a bunch of the Druze that end up living. And then over in here, where this new line is that you can kind of see drawn, that goes all the way up over this right here, right? This border that I'm kind of tracing out, this border right here would be the border with Lebanon, and Israel created this little buffer zone. Well, now they're pushing more and more troops over into the area. Crazy. Now, also talking with Jonathan yesterday, one of the things that he said is that obviously you don't want to fight wars on multiple fronts, and you don't want to have your forces divided, because that would be a huge problem. Incog Faraday coming in and gifting out 5 Speak the Truth memberships. So I think Israel's going to do their best to solve this problem from the air before they actually commit troops to the ground. Now, what they absolutely will do is they will defend this border. If HTS comes anywhere near it, you better, seriously, you throw some serious money on this, that Israel will push into Syria deeper, and they will go after HTS, and they will push them back north of Damascus. They will have Damascus in their sights, like rifle range, right? Within like 550 meters. Right, they'll be that close to Damascus if that ends up happening. And I don't think it will, because Jelani knows that, as long as Jelani is alive. But if Jelani gets killed, you better believe that HTS is going to start running wild the moment that that word ends up getting down there. This situation right here can spiral out of control very, very fast. Israel doesn't like Jelani, and I don't blame them. I don't like Jelani, and most of the world doesn't like Jelani. The man was in Al-Qaeda, started ANF, and then he commanded HTS, and he was friends with al-Baghdadi, the frickin' leader of ISIS, before he got schwacked under the last administration, Trump administration. And so, yeah, if they end up taking him out and he ends up getting killed, you better believe, with the MOD taken out, communications getting frickin' shattered, that HTS is going to go wild, and they're going to start massacring people. They will. You want to see a genocide happen? Watch Jelani get killed. And I think that might be the only thing that's saving his neck right now. That might be the only thing saving Jelani's neck right now. This situation is, I like the word dire. It doesn't really do it justice, to be quite honest with you. Netanyahu actually came out and gave this word to the Druze earlier, asking them not to cross the border, as I showed you yesterday, and go into Syria to help defend the other Druze on the ground.
אחיי אזרחי ישראל הדרוזים, המצב בסווידה, המצב בדרום מערב סוריה הוא חמור מאוד. צה"ל פועל, חיל האוויר פועל, כוחות אחרים פועלים. אנחנו פועלים כדי להציל את אחינו הדרוזים וכדי לחסל את כנופיות המשטר. ועכשיו יש לי בקשה אחת מכם. אתם אזרחי ישראל, אל תעברו את הגבול. אתם מסכנים את חייכם, אתם יכולים להירצח, אתם יכולים להיחטף, ואתם פוגעים במאמצים של צה"ל. ולכן אני מבקש מכם, חזרו לבתיכם, תנו לצה"ל לפעול.
Well, he can say, let the IDF do their jobs all he wants, but those Druze are moving very, very quickly. Yesterday, I showed you guys videos of the Druze that ended up crossing the frickin' border and going into Syria. And I also showed you videos of them coming back. You want to see what that border looks like today? Because a lot of the Druze that crossed the border yesterday and ended up going into Syria ended up coming back overnight. Take a look at what that frickin' border looks like today. Now, how long do you think this is going to last? The Druze aren't going to stand by and watch their people get freaking slaughtered. They're not. That border wall is about to get ripped down. And it's been breached in several other locations. I mean, several locations that border wall has been breached. You don't want to believe me? You don't think that it's actually happening? Here's the border wall being breached. Now, it's one thing to have these guys kind of like running across the border like they are right here. PFC Brewer says, keep up the good reporting. Love it. Thank you, Mr. Brewer. It's one thing to have the border wall breached. It's a pretty long move over to Damascus or over to Sweda. You're talking about 70 kilometers-ish, 65, 70 kilometers. It depends on where they end up breaching, right? Maybe 50, but I think the closest that I ended up mapping out was like 65, right? Here's the problem. Check this out. Now, what you're looking at over here is the Druze after they cross the border going over into Syria. Look at how many of them there are. Look at how many of them there are. And I want you to take a look at the vehicles that are standing by to pick them up on the other side. They are rolling out in freaking force. to go back up their brothers over on the other side of the border. Momo in the comments says, breaking, a Syrian interior minister source told Sanaa news agency that a ceasefire deal was reached in Suwaida with security checkpoints to be set up on the city fully reintegrated into the state Contra. Well, that's all fine and dandy. But here's the problem, is that Jelani's men weren't allegedly supposed to be massacring the Druze in the way in which they did. They weren't supposed to be going over there. They weren't supposed to be cutting off beards and mustaches. They weren't supposed to be killing the leaders. They weren't supposed to be burning churches. They did all that because of their religious ideology. And so because of that, because of them doing that, I don't know if they're actually going to listen and they're going to stop. They quite literally, they really are bloodthirsty savages. And so I could easily see them continuing on with this fight and it not going anywhere. And so while the government might have reached some sort of a ceasefire, I highly doubt that a lot of those guys are going to abide by it, that they're going to listen to it, that they're going to give two craps. Because right now you have Israeli citizens, as Netanyahu clearly stated, and they're Druze, crossing the border, getting picked up, and rushing to get into that fight. Rushing. And that is a major, major problem. Now, those airstrikes that Israel just conducted likely resulted in exactly what you're talking about. But I want to show you something. First, I want to show you this video. All right? I want to show you this video, and then I want to show you who it was that posted it and what they ended up saying about it. There's a reason I end up having this feeling. It's a very short clip. Now, that is the Druze after they ended up taking back over Suwaida. Look at what flag they ended up raising over there. You guys see that? The Druze ended up raising the Israeli flag over Suwaida. I'll say that again. The Druze ended up raising the Israeli flag over Suwaida. Now, what do you think the response is from people that are very, 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 very loyal to Syria, to HTS, to Jelani? This guy is an independent journalist from Dara in Syria. He's got almost 60,000 followers. His name, Omar Al-Hari. He said, clients of Israel and remnants of the regime raise the occupation's flag and declare their loyalty to it. We will bring it down and bring down your necks with it, God willing. Let history record. When did he end up putting that out? Today, about 2 hours ago. So how do you think those HTS forces are actually going to respond when they're told to have a ceasefire, particularly when their brothers just got the freaking balls blown off over inside Damascus? How well do you think they're going to respond to that? I don't think that Jelani's got such control over his men as he claims that he does. And I think it's going to turn into a freaking like poop storm. Foster Dad, hey, Matt, can you pin the Discord link, please? Yes, I will take care of that here at least at the end. I'm not going to pin it over here in the chat. Discord link is for true supporters. And so that ends up getting posted up over on the YouTube channel underneath our posts. And if you're a true supporter, you'll be able to see the brand new Discord link. Thank you for reminding me to put up a new one. Link ends up expiring at the end of every link or at the end of every week. Here's another view of the presidential palace from a different direction. All right. Or reportedly was supposed to be the presidential palace that ended up getting schwacked. Now, that was not a very large airstrike. It was a pretty small airstrike, and it was definitely a warning to Jelani. And again, it took an airstrike last time outside the presidential palace. So the other question that I ended up proposing to Jonathan last night was how long until Israel finally kind of gets sick of all this crap? When is Israel finally going to stand up and be like, you know what, enough is enough? And I asked him that question as it goes towards Iran, and his answer, and I think a lot of other people's answer is quite frankly, Israel should not and doesn't have the ability to be conducting these different airstrikes and be doing these different things without actually getting support from the U.S. government. And it's crazy because the U.S. government is actually the ones that told them not to be striking Jelani's forces. But they did it anyways. They did it anyways. And they bombed right outside the presidential palace. And as you guys have just seen throughout this freaking broadcast, not only did they do the presidential palace, but they leveled the MOD. This is the U.S. ambassador to Syria. We unequivocally condemn violence against civilians in Syria. Full stop. All parties must step back and engage in meaningful dialogue that leads to a lasting ceasefire. Perpetrators need to be held accountable. Well, who were the perpetrators? Ambassador Barak? The perpetrator was al-Jelani. Perpetrator was HTS. They sent their forces down there claiming that they were going to restore peace after the clashes broke out between the Druze and other clans that wanted to go over and freaking massacre them. So the Druze are defending themselves against being genocided, and then HTS goes down there and reinforces the genocide. And yet the United States just took a very strong stance, probably, likely, telling Israel to stop. And so we have here in this administration what appears to be another, statement on face value, which is whoever's responsible for this needs to be held accountable. Israel's busy holding them accountable by bombing the MOD, dropping a bomb outside of the presidential palace, warning Jelani. And yet we're going to claim that we're going to hold people accountable? No, we're not. We actually just did the opposite of it. Now, here's something else that I found really interesting. Just going to show this. This is outside of Syria. You guys know what that is up there on your screen? That's sitting on the hood of that truck? This is Jelani's men. This is HTS outside of Syria. That is a Starlink receiver, pulling internet from Starlink. So they're using that. Now, here's something really interesting that I started thinking about, because my first thought was, oh no, we need to cut Starlink, right? Like, Elon Musk, where the hell are you at? Why are we allowing, this terrorist to use Starlink to massacre people? And then I realized something else. Elon, regardless of what's been going on in the media, regardless of, his feelings for the Trump administration, all of that other crap, right? Regardless of all of that, does have close ties with the government. And I would not be surprised if the U.S. is monitoring the traffic that's going through Starlink, figuring out what the heck is actually going on the ground. We know exactly who's giving the orders. We know exactly where that information is coming from. And I would think that the United States government is well aware of all of this stuff. And yet we just got that statement from the U.S. ambassador stating that those people need to be held accountable. Now, I'm going to shift your guys' focus from there. And I want to take you guys over to Gaza, because believe it or not, once you get out of Syria and you go back over into Israel and start focusing on Gaza, some other big news ended up coming out today. Obviously, Israel has been increasing their airstrikes on Gaza, right? Like, they've been going after Hamas, particularly up in the north over here in Beit Hanun, following the ambush last week, and then also down in Khan Yunis following that ambush, where you had multiple mass casualty incidences that had occurred. But the other big issue that I've been talking to you guys about is the humanitarian aid distribution. And if it doesn't get a handle on it, all right, BB88, I guess I need to go check before I do that, BB's telling me he's got new footage for me, and I got to go check it out. So now I got to go do it. Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, BB, I hear you. Let me grab that link and show you guys. It's actually a pretty good, that's an aftermath, it looks like, of the Syrian MOD. So let me get that up on the screen for you guys before I start talking about this. So we'll go back over into Syria, because BB ended up tracking down some really cool pictures following the airstrike. I can't blame him for might want me to put it up on the screen. Here's the MOD following that airstrike. Look at the vehicles. Look at everything outside of that building. This is my first time seeing them along with you guys. And normally I tend to scrub through this stuff, but I mean, airstrike over on that building. Yeah, this is some pretty cool aftermath, BB. Thank you. That's some pretty serious damage that ended up taking place out there. Right. So I don't know what the casualties were in this incident, but what I do know is that is freaking gnarly. And Israel could have done a much better job and completely and totally leveled it. I know that, and I think we all know that. Yeah, everybody thank BB for getting this freaking images out to us, because it's pretty wild. He also sent me something else. Let me go take a look and see what the other thing is that he ended up sending me. Yeah, it's just an image of the airstrike. That's pretty cool. A lot of people died. And that's what I'm getting at. And I think that, yeah, that parking lot is pretty empty. No kidding. And I think that initial airstrike was meant to kind of like push people away, and then had another airstrike on top of the building. That's a roof knock of all roof knocks, if we're going to be perfectly honest with you. But like I said, I want to take you guys back over in here into Gaza, all right? Because there is a significant incident that ended up occurring over inside Gaza, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, had already put out a statement on it. 20, I'll say it again, 20 Gazans ended up getting trampled to death over picking up humanitarian aid in Gaza. That is a pretty significant event that undoubtedly is going to have some sort of political spin that's going to get like pushed on it, right? I know Hamas, and Hamas is going to come out and try claiming that, Israel is responsible for all these deaths, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want you guys to take a look. I told you guys that after talking with senior leadership over inside of SRS and GHF, that the humanitarian aid distribution going on inside of Gaza is wild. That basically there's a couple hours from the moment that it ends up getting delivered to these distribution sites, right? So when the aid gets brought in to the distribution sites, from the moment it touched ground, it's only there for a couple hours before the Gazans go over, they pick it up and they run off with it. Check this out. I can't do. Why do they always have to put some weird music over top of everything? It just blows my mind. I hate that so much. I would rather hear the chaos that's going on. I want you to take a look at this. They just have piles of boxes that they're rifling through, right? Originally, we ended up seeing them going over and picking up these boxes and walking off with the boxes. Now they're like emptying the boxes into easier carrying bags, likely leaving all the trash. So then I got to assume the SRS personnel are going out there, put it in a big pile and just burning it, because what else are you going to do with it out there? So they probably got a big old burn pit out there. That's what I would think. And then rinse, cycle, and repeat on a daily basis. Now, look at the chaos of this scene. Boop. Let me back this up. There's a good image right there. What you see happening on that one little tiny image, taking place all the way back over there. This is the humanitarian aid distribution that's taking place. It basically looks like a dang free-for-all, right? That's what it looks like to me. And I've saw, maybe it's on one of these ones that's coming up. But basically just hordes of people that are carrying and moving stuff back and forth, going in, going out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But GHF ended up putting out this statement. They said, today, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation issued the following statement regarding an incident at SDS3 over in Khan Yunis. We are heartbroken to confirm that 20 people died this morning in a tragic incident at SDS3 in Khan Yunis. Our current understanding is that 19 of the victims were trampled and one was stabbed amid a chaotic and dangerous surge driven by agitators in the crowd. We have credible reason to believe that elements within the crowd, armed and affiliated with Hamas, deliberately fomented the unrest. For the first time since operations began, GHF personnel identified multiple firearms in the crowd, one of which was confiscated. An American worker was also threatened with a firearm by a member of the crowd during the incident. The horrific event follows a deeply troubling pattern in recent days. False messages about aid site openings, including SDS4, Wadi Gaza, and the long-closed SDS1, Tal Sultan, have circulated widely on Telegram and other platforms, fueling confusion, driving crowds, and closing sites and other disorder. Just last night, GHF issued a warning in Arabic via Facebook, urging aid seekers to ignore these misleading messages and to only refer to official GHF channels for updates on our operations. More in the lives of today, and we remain committed to providing humanitarian aid as a safety responsibility, blah, 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 blah. They're going to keep going. So what happened? What you're seeing over inside of Gaza, like I said, humanitarian aid is a big deal, and I talked about this months ago when it first ended up opening up, that aid is what's going to get attacked, and that the way and the crap security that was established around it and the way that it's being distributed is going to open up for different terror attacks that are going to be taking place, and it's going to get used for propaganda purposes. And not only that, it would seem that GHF was also saying that somebody, not naming names, Hamas, is putting out false information via Telegram in order to cause more confusion, more disruption, more everything over inside Gaza. As a pretty dang big problem. Now, while we talk about that, right? Let's bring something else up for a sec here. and bookmark my spot, make sure I'm in the right place. I'm going to take you guys from Gaza, and I'm going to take you guys all the way over into Iran. And we're going to go focus down in Tehran, and I'm going to take you guys in there. Why? Because for the last week to 2 weeks, there has been, I'm losing track of time. There has been mysterious gas leaks and explosions and everything else that's taking place over inside of Syria, or over inside of Iran. I gave it, I think yesterday, I said 2 weeks, if not 2 weeks, by the end of summer before bombs start falling on Iran. Check this out. Ladies and gentlemen, these aren't isolated incidents. This isn't just one of like another. But what is being said is that there was a powerful explosion, a thick column of smoke rising. Well, they said it was over near the International Hospital in Tabriz. Excuse me. So not Tehran, but Tabriz. Citizens confirmed that they heard a loud explosion before the fire broke out. If that's the case, right? If that's the case over inside of Iran, well, I think it's pretty logical to assume that Mossad is still continuing on with operations over inside of Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think the regime change option is off the table yet. Again, another question that I ended up proposing to Jonathan Hessen was, how long do you think before Israel has enough and bombs Iran? And he didn't really directly answer it, minus, I mean, it was a very long-winded answer talking about how, well, you got to understand the situation is ever-changing. We've got all these different things going on, and it's geopolitical, and on and on and on and on and on. But one of the things that he said kind of led me to believe, or inferred in my mind, that a regime change was on the table before the end of summer. That in Matt's mind, when I see it coupled up with explosions and things like that I just had up on your screen, that they're going to definitely be going over, like these Mossad agents are going to continue to set the stage for an eventual collapse of the Ayatollah's regime, of this Iranian regime. It's gonna go away. So that's huge. That's really good news if that is actually the case. We are continuing to see signs of it today. Now, we're going to go from Iran, and I'm going to shift your guys' focus from Iran, and we're going to go up over into Ukraine. Why? Because all of this stuff is starting to come to a head. It really is. I talked last night, and I showed you guys that the Russian foreign minister didn't give two craps about, the United States giving more support to Ukraine. He flat out said it. He's like, man, it's not going to affect us. We don't care. We've been dealing with this stuff for a while, right? Everybody thinks that, Trump and Zelensky are on the freaking, like, they hate each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, yesterday, interview Newsmax, Zelensky actually made some pretty wild statements, I think, that should have been more widely broadcasted. And I guess, I don't know, just listen.
This is the difference. Most importantly, I do not want to criticize anyone. I am grateful to America for all the help during this war. America has supported us, and I have always said, we are grateful to the White House, grateful for the bipartisan support. It was there, and I am very grateful that it continues. But President Biden was not able to end this war. I am confident that President Trump can do it. I think that will be the main difference. This is the difference. Most importantly,
okay, so Zelensky thinks that Trump actually can bring an end to this war. That's a good thing. And then an update Nate Vance actually just sent me while I was doing the broadcast is that reportedly Al-Jawlani actually had fled from the presidential palace to an unknown location amid fears of his assassination. So there's a quick update for you guys on the situation over inside Syria that Jawlani very well could have fled and gone somewhere else. Now, the important part about what we're talking about here and what we're just talking with Zelensky, obviously Trump opened up for NATO to be able to purchase weapons from the United States of America in order to give them to Ukraine. Rumors about our Patriot missile systems being sent over to Ukraine were kind of like one of the big things. I think it was like 13 of them is what the rumor was. That's not the case. That actually came out today. That wasn't 13. It's actually 13 separate components for basically a Patriot battery that's heading over into Ukraine. So now that confusion has been cleared up by Ukrainian officials. Now, the interesting part as well, we were talking last night about Kellogg being over inside of Kiev. And people were saying that Kiev was getting bombed when Kellogg was there, or the U.S. envoy, right? Listen to what Zelensky had to say about that.
General Kellogg arrived in Ukraine, and there were no massive bombings for 2 nights in a row. This is a very interesting example. There were no heavy attacks this night and the previous night. Even people are already joking about it, saying that we should give General Kellogg a Ukrainian passport and leave him here, and that Americans should come to us more often, because then Russia would bomb less. What does this mean? That Putin deliberately bombs civilians, but when the Americans are here, he doesn't do it. Putin will try to intimidate, blackmail, and create tension, but he does not go for a full escalation. This means one thing: Putin is afraid of America. I've been saying this all along, and I've also told the president. Whatever the case, Putin is afraid of America, and I am sure of it.
Cool. So Putin's afraid of America. Well, that's good. If they're not going to be bombing when Kellogg's there, well, that raises new questions. And that question specifically, as far as I'm concerned, is what is Putin going to do in response to all of this? And I'm telling you, like, I ended up, I am seeing more and more signs that Ukraine has something up their sleeve. Now, last year, I believe it was last year, let me get this up on the map. Last year, inside of southern Ukraine, just south of Zaporizhia, down in some of this Russian-occupied area around Mariupol, what we ended up seeing was reports of partisan forces that were going in, getting Russian soldiers drunk and killing them. That would be the ultimate honeypot, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, right? And that was taking place. And then we know that Ukraine has been going after Russian supply lines. They've been bombing the railroad that cuts through this area. They have been going after the Kerch Bridge. They have been going after Russian munition supplies over inside of Russia itself. They've been taking out a lot of different things. Check this video out that I came across today that's being reported. Now, I haven't seen this before, so I'm assuming it is new. It looks like it actually came out today. Now, watch.
Илюша! Илюша! Алло! Слышь меня? Пальцев сколько? Сколько? Каких 4, блядь? 3? Сейчас сколько? Чё болит? Болит чё? Илюша!
Now, if you guys can tell, that is a Russian soldier, right? That is a Russian soldier over inside the camp. They're speaking Russian. You've got like his little red tape that's over and behind it. And he's asking him what hurts and where it hurts and all that other stuff. And the guy's clearly out of it. And it says that this guy actually ended up dying, right? And what is being said is that the Russian water supply actually got poisoned and that this guy is actually dying from being poisoned. Now, what does that tell me? That tells me that those partisan forces, likely, right? I highly doubt the Russian military is doing all this crap on their own, moving all of the supplies and everything else. I just don't think that's possible. Most of the time, and I know even the U.S. military was guilty of doing this, is that what you end up doing, because logistics is one of those things that drives operations. And undoubtedly, what you end up having is local nationals from these different areas that are being employed by Russia in order to move all of this stuff around. That's just the way it goes. You don't have it under control, strict control of the Russian military at all times. And so even if this is a small incident, even if this ends up, I don't want to say, even if this ends up being, how do I want to say, just a series of them and not their entire water supply, even if that ends up being the case, then what you are likely going to see is Russians that are not trusting in everything that they have. Now, on a panel yesterday that Nate and I were on, it was said that the reason Russians are throwing all of their forces over in Sumy, because up north inside Sumy, you have about 50,000 Russians that were amassed prior to the entire battle starting. I haven't heard any reports on how many Russians actually ended up getting killed, but what I do know, and that I ended up sharing last night, was that Russia hasn't really made it very far on the front line over there. Like, they fell right into the trap, just like we talked about last month, and they ended up getting like their butts kicked. The only territorial gains that got reported by ISW yesterday was actually by Ukraine forces up near Sumy. Everything else, if you guys watched last night's live stream, everything else, Russia was making offensive operations. They were attempting offensive operations, and zero territorial gains had been reported or confirmed. And so Russia is throwing all of their soldiers into the mix. And the interesting thing about the panel that Nate and I were on yesterday was the words that somebody had said, which was the reason Russia continues to commit all of their forces is because their logistical supplies, like all of their freaking supplies, have been, crap. That they can't feed the soldiers. They don't have enough water. They don't have enough anything. They can move soldiers in, but getting those soldiers to support, meh. And so their way of moving forward, which is actually a pretty sound theory, is to go over and take Ukrainian positions, or they die. Marco Rubio said over 100,000 Russians have died so far this year over inside of Ukraine. 100,000. We're not even talking about the North Koreans at this point, who are likely going to be arriving to the front line sometime in the near future, and then they get to die too. But if the supply lines don't exist and Russia is continuing to push their soldiers forward, and then you listen to the statements from Zelensky where he said that he actually thinks that he's got faith in Trump, that he could actually bring this to an end. That's not my assessment. That's what Zelensky said. And you put those two things together, it might make a little bit of sense. And so while Russia might be playing hardball, where we had Lavrov saying, I don't care, it couldn't happen, it's not a big deal, and you have this going on, well, I do think that it is a big deal. And I look at this and I go, it is a possibility. I don't want to put it as a probability, but it is a possibility that Russian supply lines have been attacked to the point where they can't feed and they can't, water, for lack of better terms, their own troops. And if that's the case, and Russia continues to throw them into the grinder because of that, their casualty numbers are going to increase drastically. Drastically. I'm not saying I agree with the Russian soldiers being poisoned, but if that's what partisan forces are doing, that's completely separate from the Ukrainian government, right? They're just over there attacking the Russians the best way that they know how. And if they're having that big of an impact against the Russians, well, so be it. That's a good thing. Now, even though all of that was going on in the town of Vinnytsia, which, by the way, let me see if I can get this up, because I want to show you guys this strike that actually took place. It is somewhere. There it is. As I say, it's somewhere in this region. So Vinnytsia, all the way down here, right, over inside of Ukraine. What I'm about to show you came out of Vinnytsia last night, allegedly. So you're talking about God only knows how many miles away from the frickin' front line. It is a beautiful, beautiful town. Very beautiful town. This was the scene of Vinnytsia. I'm sorry, it wasn't last night. It was 2 days ago. So you've got Russia doing these deep drone attacks, these deep drone strikes, and all this other crap that's taking place over inside of Ukraine. Sure, they're going after the front line. Sure, they're trying to assault. But the other thing that they're doing is these very, very deep strikes, and they're doing them against civilian targets. They've been doing them against Kiev, and they're doing it against all these other places, right? And so that speaks to desperation, number one, or number two, that Russia is trying to target Ukrainian supply routes themselves to slow them down because they're a bit worried. If Ukraine has this huge influx of ammunition and everything that we're expecting to be going in sometime in the near future, and Russia's supplies are that depleted, it's really not outside the realm of possibilities for Ukraine to be able to push across some of these Russian lines where they've been throwing their troops at them, right? Where Russia has been throwing their troops. And once you get that momentum and you start pushing those Russian soldiers back, like we're seeing up over outside of Sumy, a counteroffensive becomes a very real possibility. Texas yesterday, when we were talking, said that he's getting reports that before, where munitions were getting rationed, like key munitions were getting rationed, that now they're kind of easing up and allowing those key weapons to be going out more and more into the battle because they've got orders confirmed. They're not worried about it, that these munitions are now flowing into Ukraine. And if that's the case, and Ukraine was this effective without them, when Ukraine ends up getting those munitions, how much more effective are they going to be? They're going to be very effective in pushing the Russians back. So, if this ends up being true, there's a couple locations that me personally, I would like to watch. Let me get this pulled up on the map. I want to pull up. Oh, no, that's not the right map. No, silly. That's not what I said. Why is it doing this now? Hold on. Give me a sec. That's really weird. Oh. Nope, that's where I thought I was. Here we go. All right. So there's a couple locations that I'm going to watch, and one of them is up over here in Sumy. Like this front, like I told you guys about, that I had like detailed on the map, it looked very, very clear that Russia was falling into a trap, and this is where they had thrown 50,000 troops into the battle over there. And right now what's being reported is that Ukraine has been pushing them back and is actually taking some terrain back from the Russians, and we have some of that that's been geo-confirmed. Russia has been unable to advance. I'll say that again. Russia has been unable to advance, and it was all along this route that I had showed you guys where like Russia is going to fall into a major trap, and that they did. You have all of this open terrain down here. And so what Ukraine did for a lot of this area was they started retrograding back, and then they stopped right over here at this like key MSR intersection that leads straight down into Sumy. You guys can see it like pulling right through out of Katyn, going down into Sumy. Ukraine had set up their defensive lines there, and then they ended up launching a counterattack after letting the Russians slaughter themselves for a while. Not a big one, but a little one. And so if these munitions are flowing in there, and these Russians honestly don't have the supplies to sustain the battle, and that they're not well fed, and that they're pretty dang dehydrated, and they're getting freaking schwacked left and right, and these weapons are now coming in, it would make sense to put a bunch of weapons up over there, because you have 50,000 Russians allegedly that are over there behind these front lines. And they don't have very strong defensive positions. That is a huge chunk of the Russian army that can get taken out very, very quick. I know a lot of you are thinking, well, why would they, commit themselves to such a large counterattack against such a large force? And that's exactly why. It might seem very large to you, but when we take other locations over across Ukraine, and let me zoom out a little bit, and we go south over in Zaporizhia, where, the Russians are wanting to take terrain and not doing a very good job of it. They might have claims of it, but it hasn't been happening. When you start looking at where the actual defensive line's at, the defensive perimeter, and you start talking about some sort of a different counteroffensive, no, that doesn't make sense, because once Ukraine ends up reaching those lines, particularly with these different support that's over behind, like such over inside Tokmak, right? When you start looking at those different locations, Ukraine would end up losing a lot of men trying to push over there. These Russians are going to be a hell of a lot better supplied, right? Down here in the south, or even out over in the east. But up in Sumy, where you have Russians that are pushing in and have just recently taken terrain that Ukraine gave to them, for lack of better terms, that makes perfect sense for a good Ukrainian counteroffensive. And so I think if we're going to see one, it's likely going to end up coming from there. That's what I think, because you have more bang for your buck. You have logistical supplies that are not like logistical supply lines that aren't really fully intact. So I think that's a very good possibility for that may be coming. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that don't know, I ended up bringing back the devotionals, okay? And I've got one set up, prepped, and ready to go for today. So that's going to be happening. If you're not Christian, don't stick around. If you don't want to listen to it, you're free to leave. Everybody else it is, you guys want to partake in it, by all means, stay here. I'm going to go ahead and bypass the Discord today because I have some personal business that I have to take care of, but we'll get to it again. So Discord link will get posted immediately following this. So here we go. Into today's devotional. And the reading that goes along with it comes out of 1 Peter, all right? It says, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. Remembering that priests and prophets and kings were anointed as confirmation of their special callings, we need to take our calling as God's sheep seriously. The Apostle Peter points out the high calling that is in our lives as the people of God. We are the chosen people, a royal priesthood, God's special possession. Called to kingly and queenly service, we are led to the same manner as the great high king, the Lord Almighty. We are to radiate God's excellence attributes to the world through our leadership as parents, in our workplaces, in our communities, and everywhere else. And I think those words right there are pretty dang key. Priests are called to pray for a broken world, bringing that brokenness to the one who can heal. Priests also represent God to the world and invite people who don't recognize the shepherd to gain a glimpse of his love and mercy on our own lives. Peter also uses the word holy, meaning that we are set apart from this valuable work for the sake of the Lord's lost sheep. Our purpose is in all of this is to share with others the good news and the great works of the Lord who called us out of the darkness and into his wonderful light. Each of us is a living picture of the shepherd's mercy and grace, equipped to invite others to the best way to live. Prayer that goes along with it. Lord, help us to radiate your goodness in the world by your words and actions. May we reflect the light of your love. Amen. Now, personally, I think that it is a very powerful message, even though it doesn't seem like it. I think yesterday's fit a little bit more into the war, right? But with what we're seeing going on in the world, it does have a lot, all right? And it has a lot of deep meaning to it. Being good Christians, being good parents to your children ends up changing the world. You don't get to change the world by dropping bombs. You end up getting to stop a psychopath. Changing the world is by changing people, right? And by your fruits, you'll be judged. And those different fruits people will look at, and they'll be actually brought and hopefully have their soul saved at the end of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me for another episode of the Speak the Truth podcast. You guys are going to see me again tonight, right around 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. I'm actually going to do it at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time tonight as opposed to 9. So I hope to see you guys there. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, peace, love, happiness, and God bless. I am out of here.